So that mic is open. What I would say is that people should bring to the table questions for any of the presentations throughout the course of the day. Since there wasn't a lot of time for question and answers, I think it's appropriate that we have a general process of dialogue. And so Hal Cooper has the first question.
Ben, this is for you. As we discussed earlier, I'm doing a lot of work on oil and gas production in North Dakota. We have a problem, believe it or not, with radioactive wastes because we have uranium in our soil and in our oil. And when we produce the oil, the natural gas goes out the top, the oil goes out the center, and the brine water goes out the bottom. Believe it or not, when you bring up oil, most of it came from marine algae, but not all. You're not only bringing up the oil, you're bringing up the ocean with you. And that ocean contains uranium. Now, you also said that you mentioned deuterium is in the water. Is tritium also? And what do you know, or what can you say publicly about what the status of recovery systems are that would be applicable in ocean water?
I'm actually not up on all the details on the processing for the ocean water. I know that generally the idea that with the higher energy flux densities, it enables an ability to process these much lower concentration things. So like with uranium, for example, the idea would be that if uranium is one of many trace elements in the ocean water. The parts per million, it's very few parts per million, but there's a lot of other stuff in there. There's precious metals, there's gold, there's all kinds of stuff in the ocean water. The point is that when mankind moves to things like fission, fusion power, it allows us to actually process bulk materials like that and pull out the elements that we want from that. So moving to these higher production methods, moving to fission and fusion really does fundamentally change our idea of what are accessible natural resources. So going to a nuclear economy allows us to take something like ocean water, which right now we could use maybe for desalination even with existing systems. You can use the water for other purposes. But moving to a fission and fusion economy, we can literally begin mining trace elements out of ocean water and using this as a resource for metals for all kinds of other productions.
In my work on radioactive waste, I've come across several processes, but one in particular that's been developed by a company in British Columbia, that you can take the radioactive materials in the filter socks that you get from taking the solids out of the brine water, and you go through a thermal process which has an organic catalyst, and most of the radioactive materials are in the form of radium, not uranium, but radium. And when it goes through this process, what comes out the other end is stable lead. There's no radioactivity. When you put a Geiger counter up against the solids, you don't get any reading. Does that sound like transmutation? And a very good solution, which again is something else that's been suppressed. And do you have any other information, Ben, about that subject?
About the process of the radiation effects you're dealing with in general? Yeah, I mean, the point is this whole radiation thing has become a big, crazy scare. And the point is, I mean, literally, with a fusion economy, we literally have the ability to transmute things on an economic scale. So you have a fission process, you have a fission reactor, you generate certain radioactive materials. With a fusion economy, you could literally transmutate those materials to different elements that aren't radioactive at all. So I mean, the idea that nuclear waste is going to be even a concern with a progressing fusion economy is just kind of a joke. We literally, with the control of the atom, we have the ability to really control these different elements and eliminate any threats of waste that we encounter in these different processes. That's that. Some on the technical side, and there's probably some more questions out there. Yeah, again, it's really not an issue. The vast majority of what is used in a nuclear reactor is still usable as fuel. So the vast amount of what gets pulled out, generally people throw around terms of waste. They generally think of the spent fuel. The vast majority of the used uranium that right now they're talking about putting in Yucca Mountain or whatever, the vast 95, 99 around % of that is still usable fuel. It could be reprocessed, it could be reutilized. So the amount of stuff that's not uranium, that's not fuel coming out of that is very, very minuscule. So I mean, it's the equivalent of the amount of quote-unquote waste elements you couldn't directly use necessarily for other purposes that come out of the process. The amount that's generated for an entire person's lifetime powered by fission fuel would fit in the palm of your hand. And so it's not... No, it's very valuable stuff we could be utilizing, reusing right now. Go up to the mic.
Yeah, I'm the industrial steam fitter. Yeah, I'm the industrial steam fitter. For the last 100 years, they've used the standard industry energy sources. They boil water into steam. You boil coal, oil, natural gas, a forest full of wood, nuclear fuel. Will fission power basically boils water. Will fusion power do the same thing and merely boil water into steam? Or is it another method of creating energy?
You would have, now Ben may have some other information than I have, but here's what I understand about that question. You have a great deal of waste heat from fission. You would also have waste heat from fusion. And can you harvest that? Yes. Going through the cycles you're talking about, you would have the ability to probably escalate the ability to desalinate water by at least a factor of 10.
But all you're doing is boiling water to turn a coil inside a magnetic field. You're making steam to do this work. That's essentially all you're doing, be it fission or fusion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, with fusion, and especially with more advanced fuels, you actually could move beyond that. You can use the plasma. The fusion reaction occurs in a plasma, hot ionized gas. You control that with magnetic fields. You could run that magnetized gas, basically this plasma, through magnetic coils and do what they call direct conversion. So you don't have to use the heat to boil steam. Use the actual electrical and magnetic properties of the plasma itself, the fuel itself. You can control the fuel itself. You can run the fuel itself through coils because the fuel has electrical and magnetic effects because it's in a plasma state, and that can directly generate electricity. So with the standard steam turbine system, whatever fuel you're using, uranium, coal, whatever, you generally have around only 33, 35, 30, 40% of the energy created in the reaction actually becomes electricity. So actually 2/3 of the energy actually ends up getting wasted for the most part. With direct conversion, we could actually be getting more like 60, 70, potentially more percent of the energy from the fusion reaction converted directly to electricity. We call direct conversion.
Seawater, huh? That's pretty good for seawater.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot of it too, so there's not really a...
I know one technology you haven't mentioned is genetic manipulation of plants to use other elements in the atomic chart to manufacture products. Has any research been done in that area? Because living things only use certain elements in the atomic chart. If it could be genetically manipulated, you could manufacture other materials through biological bacteria, plants, whatever.
Yeah, no, I've heard I don't have anything off the top of my head, but I know there's studies looking at utilizing the power of life to perform such processes. I don't have any specifics.
Sure.
Anybody drive a Mustang? I think you might need to move it. Oh, that's Maureen? You drive the Mustang? Oh, used to. I think, no, this gentleman right over here raised his hand, Mindy. No, you don't drive a Mustang? Oh, who drives a Mustang?
Silver Mustang convertible.
Silver convertible Mustang. Somebody back there sleeping in the room or something? Somebody said we'll park, they want to leave. I guess God's telling you should stay. I don't know what to say. All right, go ahead with your question.
All right. Yeah, I've been reading, I guess, in a number of places about the possible use of thorium in reactors. It may have some advantages over uranium. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's another fission fuel. I think the biggest thing is there's more of it. There's 4 times more thorium than uranium on the Earth in average. It's accessible. It's another fission fuel. I think a bigger point is that with all these things, there's no limits to growth for society. We've had the chance for all of these technologies since the 70s and earlier. This has all been technically... I mean, we had thorium reactors being built in the 50s. So it's not like this is some new novel technology that someone just came up with and we didn't know about before. This is stuff that's been on the table, that's been possible, that's been at the grip, at the grasp of mankind for decades. What we've lacked is the ability to overthrow this imperial system that's turned our nation away from this. And I think, using this idea of these juxtaposed 50-year perspectives, I think is critical. We have to see what we're dealing with right now today as the effect of decades of no growth, decades of no progress, and we need a clean, dramatic break from that ideology. We need something fundamentally new, a fundamentally new concept that's going to be foreign to a lot of American people at this point. The culture is so degenerated, progress is not a real living concept for the American people today, especially for the younger generations. My generations live with no real economic revolutions that they can associate with personally. So it's going to be a major fight to actually bring what is, for this society today, is a totally new concept of progress. And I think, just to emphasize a point, it's not a question of some new breakthrough technology that we never knew about that's going to come and save everything. We know what we need to do technologically. We know what we need to do to support the world population. We need a fusion economy. The question is, can we mobilize the political fight needed to actually ensure that we win the immediate political objectives to make that happen? And I think I would also encourage other people to, I think there's a lot discussed today on the issues of the cultural challenges and the challenges to in the identity of the American population needed to be able to lead this fight. And I would really encourage people to also raise any thoughts and questions on all the other elements discussed throughout the conference today, because I think there's a lot of very profound and important issues raised. So.
That's the direction I was going to go here. Now, I've been working for the last 6 months with some of the senior management engineers at the Department of Water and Power of Los Angeles and the Metropolitan Water District, Southern California, going back and forth, firing to them all the new material we've been putting out. And what I get back is tremendous interest. At one point, I posed to the guy who kind of coordinates all these guys. They're all retired, right? And they're somewhat of a lobby education organization. But I posed to them the following question. If you had no political blocks, no environmentalist blocks, and no financial blocks, what policy would you carry out? Right? And the guy sent me an email back with one word, NAWAPA. Right? And that's the way, that gets right at the problem. Right? As you raise to them the political questions, they resort to, at best, some technical engineering kind of response, and it demonstrates a point that's been made here repeatedly during the day of both the deterioration of the intellectual, cultural environment in the nation on one side, and also on the other, the fear of actually taking on the environmentalists or the stupid politicians or the insanity of the budget problems. Right? And so I think maybe Harley could respond to this question, because it really does get at the whole fundamental question of the culture as a whole.
Well, I think this is what Lynn has been writing about over the last year and a half on this question of creativity and the question of what is the nature of man. And what we have to realize is that virtually everyone in this society has made a compromise. And that compromise is to look for something of comfort to fall into, whether it's professional sports, whether it's pornography, whether it's video games, whether it's just wanting to be left alone. People are terrified of taking up this question of responsibility. That's how I see the degeneration. And people say, well, you can't do it, you can't fight them. And the people who say that haven't tried. Or they've made one phone call and they ran into a roadblock. Now, if you recognize that your life and the life of humanity depends on changing things, then you'd have a different perspective. So the first problem is most people don't know the reality. And that's why Lynn keeps saying we're facing the extinction of mankind, whether through food crises that add to the plagues and other kinds of diseases. We're already seeing with the collapse of healthcare, basically half the population is becoming a human petri dish for the development and spread of new diseases, the war danger, and so on. So the first thing is you have to recognize that these are real threats, existential threats to civilization. And someone has to do something. Now, who's that someone? And that's the real question. Because, the question you posed, Pat, is, if it were easy to do this, what would you do? And they say, well, yeah, I do what NAWAPA, I do what LaRouche is saying. It's not easy because the first thing is you have to recognize that you're not doing the job you should do as a human being. And I think that's true of all of us, including members of our own organization, as Lynn is often pointing out. So that's the first step. Now, once you recognize that it's not, there's no simple way to do it. You could get killed, you could get jailed. It's not likely, especially if we get the numbers that we need. But you're going to die anyway. What do you live for? And that's why I'm so moved by this statement of Kennedy, who says, we breathe the same air, we have the same aspirations for our children, we are all mortal. We're all in this together. We're not alone. And we're at a point now that the way you defeat a bully, which is what the oligarchy is, they have nothing. They're like the big fat kid on the block who throws around his weight because he knows everyone else will cower and give up. What happens when a couple people say, we're not going to put up with this anymore? Or as in the Schiller play, The Rutli Oath, there's a limit to the tyrant's power. What's the limit? When people won't tolerate it anymore. So don't tell me you can't do it, you can't win, we need easy circumstances. Just do it. Start organizing. Challenge yourself. And you'll see what will happen. You'll find, first of all, that you need to know more. But you'll also find that you have powers within you that you didn't think existed. Powers to reach other people. And that's really the way we have to deal with this thing. That's the message of Lyndon LaRouche, is get out and organize. Think. Be creative. Think for yourself and get others, serve as an example to others so you inspire others. And that's how we can win this fight.
Pat, I'd like to address your question in another way. Thank you, Harley, for your answer. I'll put it in real terms. In our great state of North Dakota, which has a population of 720,000 people, they voted $980 million this past legislative session to improve the roads. Well, we have lots of oil being produced, we have lots of problems, and they are on a massive building program. There's probably 30 to 40,000 people who've come into North Dakota to work on roads. Companies from all over the country are there. They're spending $540 million on improving their water systems. As far as I know, they're the only state doing that. And it's all being done with state money. There's not a cent of federal money in this. And nobody's telling them to do anything. And if you're an environmentalist, if you come there, you're in the wrong place because you're going to be very unwelcome. Just like the Greenpeace group found out in Russia. They don't do that in North Dakota. They just don't listen to you. But it's the exception. And it's the example that everyone else needs to follow. They're doing it themselves. And they're doing what others will not do. And it's a lot easier when you have lots of money. I mean, they have a $3.6 billion surplus in this little tiny state. And it's actually probably much more than that. They just aren't telling us that. But it's the exception. And it's an exception that the lead of much more needs to follow. And it's something that, I know you've been working on the electric cooperative movements, Pat, and I would suggest you look at the examples of what's been happening in the Northern Tier region with the electric cooperatives, because we're now facing a $5,000 to $10,000 or 5,000 to 10,000 megawatt gap in our electricity in the next 10 to 15 years. Why? Because of all the oil development that's going to take place. It's over and above now. We have 9,000 producing oil wells in North Dakota today. 8 years ago, there was 3,100. And by 2035, there are projected to be 93,000 producing oil wells in North Dakota. And what is the place going to look like? And God, can we afford the housing? Those are real life problems. Anybody can find a job, but not everybody can find a place to live they can afford. And, this may mean we bring lots of people in. That means a better transportation system than we have. And we got to deal with the water.
North Dakota is great. We've got a bigger problem. And I want to stay. I know, but I'm sorry, but we do have to stay focused on the bigger question. So I'm going to hold a different standard to the discussion here for the closing discussion. I would very much encourage people. There is a kind of block in the American population culturally, and it's somewhat expressed by what Hal's going through now, and it's even some of the questions tonight at the end of the discussion, because there's a kind of a rejection. There's a certain hubris to American culture that makes what we're confronted with today much more challenging. That our collaborators, and you have to think, why is it so easy to appeal to the American people to have a ally or special relationship with Great Britain? It's very easy. It's very comfortable. It's very easy to denounce the Germans, as we did during World War I. And even now, American people know nothing of German culture to this day. They know zero. But it's one thing. Many of us have German backgrounds. People almost know nothing in most countries of Europe, but you have European backgrounds. It's comfortable. At this point in time, to not break from the comfortable relationships that have existed for centuries, and to move now towards cultures of which we are completely unfamiliar with. To the extent that they've come here and been able to build better cars in some cases, or to participate in American culture as immigrants from Asia, we've accepted it. It's tolerable, they're hardworking, like many immigrants that have come over to this country have been. There isn't a lot of anti-U.S. rhetoric in Asia, at least there wasn't prior. At least the people that came over participated very optimistically. And I thought what Tanu said, the gentleman from India, was very provocative. I mean, it's, as Harley said earlier, you can tell there's a certain culture there. They're saying, we don't need the United States any longer. You guys are dying. As Kodagawa said, I knew the United States was killing itself, I just couldn't figure out why. That really is the leading intellectual perspective of Asia, and they're on the rise. And there's a denial that that's true. There's a cultural kind of like, whatever. Yeah, fine, they can do some stuff. It's very real. And I think that we have to look at that. That's fundamentally on the table. Because leadership is going to be recognizing we really are in bad condition. And as much as you might think information and knowledge of certain technologies will be useful, of course, but we have to look at how we can mobilize this country out of the crisis it's in into a joint collaboration with cultures that many people, even ourselves, who are considered intellectuals, know almost nothing about. It's a very real challenge. And yet, in that crisis, be able to contribute what's unique to the United States that those cultures are not as familiar with, which is a certain kind of Promethean creative identity of man that's unique to the Greek civilizations, that's different from what you have from Confucius and others in Asia. But you have to know it. And I'd say it's very specific with what Mr. LaRouche raises in this series of papers that's been referenced. It's a very specific, profound quality. But it's not common. It's not the basis of American hubris. It's hubris in the right way, against an oligarchy. It's the hubris of Prometheus, but it's not an unwillingness to really recognize the openness we have to have around these cultures of Asia. I think a lot more questions and a lot more discussion should be happening with people who have been to Asia, who have worked with these people, who are collaborating with these institutional figures, about what is it like? What are they doing? What challenges do they face? How many people have even been to Asia? Handful, probably most of our members. I think we have to ask a bit more profound question. That's why this is a difficult pathway. It's absolutely crucial. It's the only place in the world where there's progress, and yet there are cultural obstacles embedded in our culture, in us. As Harley said, in our own membership. Lynn says, this is the flank we have to go. We have to go here. But it's difficult. But why? It's obvious, but it's difficult. So I don't know if there's any questions, but I want to present that, which I think it's sorely lacking. And people should take it up. Look at, just do some investigations. Just look at the population. Look at the sprawl of cities in China. They are dealing with incredible challenges. But they're committed to their population. But I think people need to get to know more of this. If we do, then you're provoked with what really is human creativity. Because you have a real paradox of cultural background, of historical development, but yet it's still universal. So I invite anyone else to ask questions, because there are people here who can definitely take up both the questions of what's really happening in Asia in depth, as well as the questions of universal creativity. Not to minimize the other questions. Go ahead.
I would wonder how people could imagine a dialogue with environmentalism, because...
A dialogue with who?
With environmentalism, a dialogue with it, because we all know that it's co-opted by oligarchy from the get-go. But there are severe environmental problems that aren't really addressed by environmentalism. Like in Asia, what is the effect of that pollution on the human brain, on the infrastructure between the ears? And could fission and fusion remove selectively pollutants that are a barrier there to creativity? Lead, arsenic, these are definite barriers to impulse control and to higher thinking.
No, I think I'll take it up. I think the problem, and this is where we get into the problem. We went through similar stages of development. We went through similar levels of pollution. We're associating creativity to be the barrier to creativity is the pollution that's taking place within our environment, versus the cultural depravity that's it's not materialistic. It's not material. It's a culture, but that's the much bigger oppression. Our air is cleaner, our water is cleaner than it's been in 30 or 40 years. And we're more stupid than ever.
But our violent crime rate has gone down with the removal of lead from the environment. That has happened since the 90s. I mean, they're connected. I think.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But there's a bigger, more important question. That the reason we were able to solve any of those environmental disasters didn't come because violent crime was happening. It was because there was a sense of creative understanding of the progress that made that technology available.
As I'm saying, can we imagine in the future a dialogue with environmentalism where we can find places where they can open up to higher thinking on these matters?
Oh yeah, of course. I think that's totally accurate. Of course, environmentalism doesn't mean what we reference is this idea of population reduction. Environmentalism is a study, it's a science, but it's a part of economics.
It should be a
It
science.
is a science, and it is part of economics. It's not separated. We actually had a presentation, the first NAWAPA presentation we had at the Pasadena Hilton in California, that Dr. Cheng spoke at. His friend, Professor Wu from San Diego State at the time, presented on environmentalism as an environmental studies, because most of civil engineering is environmental studies today. So it's an integrated part. China has to look at these questions. They have to look at the smog in the air. That's clear. But it has to be part of an economic orientation towards progress. So if that's your question, yeah, absolutely.
Michael, in answer to his question, China is probably spending 30 times as much right now today on advancing emission control technologies than we are in the United States relative to coal. Our idea is let's eliminate it, let's have no economic growth. The Chinese philosophy is let's solve the problem.
Yeah.
I would like to know what role higher sources of power play
look, we can figure that out, but there's still. You have a question? You have an answer? Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I think it's time to be a little even more controversial. Look, there's a certain luxury in the environmentalist movement, which is we're a relatively wealthy country. Now, if you're in Africa or in the Congo, where the average lifespan is 40 to 47 years, or AIDS is killing millions of people, 9,000 children a day die, you have an average lifespan of 40 to 45, they're not worried about pollution. They're not worried about, are my brain waves being screwed up? Okay? They're not worried about that. They're going to improve their culture. They're going to go for progress in science, and when they get to the point, they'll clean the air up. We had stinking pollution in New York City, and the New York Times said, we don't need electricity because it'll scare the horses, who are basically defecating in the streets. So, this kind of stuff just doesn't cut it. The Chinese have 1.4 billion people. Now, if you think of the queen of the environmentalist movement, and I'll wait until there's some environmentalists to dialogue with. When that day comes, I'm happy to dialogue with them. But until then, they've got to make the point. They've got to prove that they aren't killing people. The entire Nazi movement was based on environmentalism. Hitler was a vegetarian. They worshipped the Black Forest. One of the leading Nazis afterwards, Heidegger, who was the philosopher of the Nazis, spent his last years in the Black Forest looking for the true Dasein of the German people. They were all environmentalists. They hated people. Anybody, you take the tragedy of Africa, 700 million people below the Sahara. Now, I got news for you. They're not worried about pollution. They've got pollution. They've got dead bodies in the streets. They've got war in the Congo that killed 3.5 million people. So I think it's a privilege that we have to discuss whether or not certain things are messing. First of all, I don't even believe, I'm from the East Coast. I don't believe the figures. I'll tell you one of the things that's not the crime figure down in New York City. Stop and frisk. They have a virtual police state in Manhattan. You look at the situation here. You don't know what the crime rate is. For example, they've decriminalized drugs in half the country. So half the people used to get arrested in the state of Washington or in Colorado for marijuana usage, they're not criminals anymore. Okay? Well, yes, they were. It's not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of law. No, that law was not unreasonable. See, that's what I mean. Now we're getting to where people's real life is.
This is the first time I ever came to a LaRouche thing, and I haven't seen any movement that's any better. On the other hand, I see a lot of dogma here. I've been trained in the sciences, and I see this nuclear thing, and I wonder if you get funding.
No, we don't.
Okay.
So don't wonder.
But anyway, you cannot predict where technology is going to develop the answers to our problem. Because when I was a student in the 1960s, I read articles about a worm that had the capacity to reduce aluminum in the soil. And aluminum's 11% of the Earth's surface. And a lot of biological processes are very benign. They don't take tremendous amounts of energy. How much energy you're saying per capita we're going to have with this nuclear? 30,000 kilowatts per individual? Do you need 30,000 kilowatts of energy?
We probably do to keep 7 billion people alive.
Hey, I'm for quadrupling the population.
Then that's going to take a lot of energy.
I don't think it's going to be 30,000
I think the
kilowatts
dogma,
per person.
I think
and
the
if we have that
dogma-
kind of, how hot do we want the
I
earth,
think
you know?
I think the dogma comes from the existing scientific community that you're accepting. We're not dogmatists.
Well, I feel you are. I mean, you feel that drugs should be illegal. And I think as an adult, that we should be considered able to judge for ourselves what we do with our body.
The problem isn't yourself. You don't live alone. You're not a
we
rugged
have,
individual.
We have this giant prison population now, and affecting the minorities very drastically.
It doesn't come from the drug laws.
Well, that's where the profit is because they're against the law.
If the children of this country had a future, you wouldn't have that kind of drug problem.
I don't feel in opposition to the young people I meet in this culture. I'm very proud of them, and I think they have a very good future. And I'm very optimistic of how they're going to turn out.
That's demagogically enough spoken.
I think this older generation has some kind of mindset that is really anti the younger people.
No, we're not.
I'm 72, and I see it. I see a lot of older people here that are negative.
We got a lot of younger people
not
here.
positive.
All right, you've had your say.
And you say radiation from
You've had your say.
Nuclear fallout is dangerous.
You've
Well,
had
I
your
studied
say.
nuclear
Let me say
energy,
something, okay?
and I'll tell you,
Let me answer.
radiation
Let me
is
answer.
bad for people.
Not only is it obvious that the entire environmentalist movement grew up with drugs, as we've just witnessed, but the fact of the matter is that the idea that we should be nice to our young people because they're really good people and they have such a wonderful future ahead is exactly the problem. Our youth have no future at all. Why do you think these young people are here? Why do we have these brilliant young scientists emerging, not because of their scientific education, but because they've joined this organization and decided they had to make their future without drugs, without genocide, without passing over the fact that we are in a world which is committed to the destruction of civilization as a whole. And in fact, they've taken that responsibility on themselves because our youth have absolutely no future except what these few individuals who have made themselves into creative thinking human beings. And that's the reason we have a future. And thank God, some of us made it through the 1960s.
Yeah, hi. Shifting the topic back to human creativity, I have a question for either Michael, Phil, or Harley. And before I start, I'll just say I used to do drugs, and the best thing I ever did for myself was get off of them. On the topic of youth recruitment, as an organizer full-time for the LaRouche PAC, I find it very challenging to go into university campuses and try to convey humanist ideas to the young people. Can someone please speak on the topic of youth recruitment? Thanks.
Well, I'm sure the others would have something to say. I just want to say I appreciate you guys responding to what I said, because I also think it proves very much how this cultural arrogance in the United States expresses itself and justifies itself against the cultures of Asia. I think you did an excellent job in demonstrating that. I think that really is the question we have to continue to provoke in young people. I mean, there's going to be a few of them that are going to really respond. You're not looking for masses. You're not looking for a mass movement. You're looking for a few people who are really willing to think, to really fight. I mean, what Lynn did initially was to have incredibly challenging classes, to just take people who thought they were erudites, who thought they were very well-read academics and the smartest in their class, to prove to them that they actually probably weren't. They probably weren't that smart. They didn't really know that much. And I think we have to take a similar approach with young people today. Yeah? You have a response?
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
I'm a tutor.
Sure.
I tutor high school kids. And, 4 out of 5, they're going to be real hard to reach. But 1 out of 20, they're hungry for it. And all you have to do is find them or make a few noises, they'll come to you. One of the young ladies I was tutoring. Last time I saw her, she brought me something on her computer, and she said, look, this says that the Wahhabi cult in Saudi Arabia was started by the British. Now, I didn't tell her that. You know, she brought it to me. And I said, well, you know, I don't know the details, but that sounds like something the British would be doing. And she went, oh, yeah. So take, you know, it looks bad, I know, because there are a lot of kids who just don't give a damn. But there are those who do. And I just wanted to let you know that.
Good. Anybody else want to respond to that?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. On your website or anywhere within the LaRouche family, do you ever give any instructional or mentoring what a person can do here in America? Not overseas, but here in America. Because there's a lot we need to do here. And if we can't take care of what's here, how can we take care of what's overseas?
Oh, well, that's absolutely. I mean, all of us are active here, so that's that.
So where would that be, on your website somewhere, or?
Yeah, why don't you go through that?
Just a couple of general comments. But look, on our website, we have an icon for GlassSteagall, and it gives a list of who's supporting it, where the fight stands. This is the most important fight in the United States right now, getting GlassSteagall through. Because GlassSteagall will give the country back to the people and take it away from the special interests, the bankers who have run the country into the ground. So if you want to fight to save the United States, you start with the GlassSteagall fight. And we already have 2 bills in the Senate, a bill in the House, but we've got a problem, which is Wall Street is opposed to it, and the president is on the side of Wall Street, and the Republican and Democratic leadership in the Congress are siding with Obama and Wall Street. But we've got almost 80 members of the House who signed on to the bill. We've got 10 senators. We've got to push that. We've got to get a breakthrough on that immediately. Because the key thing with GlassSteagall is it's not just a separation of commercial and investment banks. It is the basis of changing back the idea of the country to we're going to start producing something again. Not funny money, not derivatives, not speculation, but physical product, and we're going to develop in the young people a sense of being able to participate in producing for the future. Now, the key problem with young people is that they're essentially being cast aside by the society. They're being told that there's nothing to do except pleasure yourself. Nothing to do except, I mean, this is the problem with drugs. It's that there's no great adventures. There's no great frontiers. There's only your own pleasure. Seek your own pleasure. And a lot of people fall for that. What we do is we challenge people, challenge their identity. And I think to get back to your question, if you look on our website at GlassSteagall, and you'll see the other kinds of issue orientation, but what's the key? It's this question of fighting for a human identity. And that's where it's not just a question of the United States. We have 7 billion people in this world, all of whom are targeted right now by this oligarchical policy. And we have probably 6.99 billion of them who will be allies of ours against the 0.01% who are the private interest bankers. And the problem is we're not organized. And it's because people get caught up in other issues. So I think the GlassSteagall is a starting point, but the real issue is this question of creativity. And that's how you reach youth. You're absolutely right. There are a lot of people there who basically want to go to college just because that's what you're supposed to do. But it's, what, $50,000, $60,000 a year? They're going to be in debt for the rest of their lives. And they're not going to be able to get a job. And the way we recruited the youth movement in 1999, 2000, 2001 is people saw the Bush administration. They saw the no future. And the ones who came to us were the ones who wanted to do something for the future. And they're no longer youth movement. They're a young adult. They're not even young adults anymore. They're adults. I'm starting to learn these things, when a baby turns into a toddler and then a toddler turns into a potential youth movement member. So we've got to bring to those people a challenge to produce something for the future. So that's what I would say.
I did have a few comments, but I'm going to table those because it's almost 10 o'clock,
Instead, I'm going to write a review of this event, and I hope it'll be printed. And I do have also some suggestions that I'm not going to this time go public with. I'd rather speak privately with a few of you about it first. And strategic type suggestions. Now, my question is for Mike Billington, and it has to do with China. I've gotten two different sources of information about the recently new leadership in China. One which I see as credible, and the other which I don't see as credible. I'll tell you what those two views are. They're diametrically opposite.
Well, let me just intervene real quick, because I probably won't be able to give you the time to get the answer publicly.
About China?
Yeah, I think it's a fairly extensive discussion, and I think you should talk to Mike.
Oh, okay.
And get that. I think it'd be very useful, and if other people are interested, you can get a briefing from Mike right now, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay.
And the other thing I was going to ask was where does Taiwan fit into all this? But I guess that's a broad topic.
I don't know if someone can make it short, but we don't have a lot of time.
I know.
I can make it short. I mean, look, China's obviously crucial for the future. And the problem there is very, very intense. What we've learned in our recent trips there, and the reason that the Chinese are reaching out to LaRouche so much at this point, is because they are in deep, deep, deep trouble. I mean, you hear all this stuff about China's the booming economy and so forth, and we heard that they're full of optimism, they're building things and so forth. But one of the reasons and you could tell that from Mr. Ding, one of the reasons they now know that this Silk Road idea is not just a good idea, that they agreed with Mr. LaRouche 20 years ago it was a good idea, but now they know that it's necessary for their very existence because they are threatened. They're threatened because they built an economy based on exports into the dying West, and Mr. LaRouche has warned them for 30 years, 20 years, that this was a bad policy, which would make them a lot of money quick, but in the long run it would come back to bite them, as it is now, because they have $3 trillion in U.S. paper sitting in their banks. They sold real things to the U.S. in exchange for paper, because we wouldn't sell them technology. We wouldn't sell them the things they really need. So they've now got paper which is worth paper. It's worthless, literally. They're doing, with some of it, they're building other things in Africa and Southeast Asia and so forth, which is useful. But they know that they have to develop their interior. They have to uplift the power of labor within their country to survive, because they're in deep, deep trouble. The new president, Xi Jinping, knows that you have to do this and that it's not easy. They may not succeed. The previous president, under Hu Jintao, knew this was a problem, but they absolutely failed to reverse their policy of exports over development. They did the Three Gorges, they did some good things, but they need much, much more than a few projects. They need a total transformation of their country. They're aware of that. Most of the people we met in these recent trips said, we know that's what we have to do. Can we do it? And they, more than anything, they know that if they don't reverse the disaster in the West, in Europe and the United States, that they're not going to survive either. So that's the key to this new administration, is that it's, and in answer to what do we do here, and instead of overseas, that's not the right question. We have to convey to people here that if we're going to succeed in saving this country, they have to open their hearts to the genocide that's going on globally, to the crisis that humanity is facing. We will not win the fight here if we don't get people to not be parochial, but to think, as I said before, Friedrich Schiller's view, that you have to be a patriot of our nation. But to do that, you also have to be a citizen of the world. And this is the only way we're going to win. We won't win otherwise, that's all.